Her daughter wrinkled her nose and said, "God, Mom, have you even showered?" Barbara didn't answer. She just folded the laundry with trembling hands. By sunrise, the joint account they shared was empty. The girl who once borrowed her credit card now needed a bus fare. For years, Barbara gave without asking. Now she was done explaining herself to someone she raised. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The wind had teeth that night. Pat gripped the steering wheel tighter as she pulled into the stone-paved driveway, her old sedan looking painfully out of place beside the sleek black Lexus parked beside it. The house loomed, all glass and angles, lit up like a showroom. She sat for a moment, exhaling a slow breath into the stale air of her car. Then, with practiced precision, she folded the paper bag of cookies she'd brought, store-bought, yes, but arranged in a tin with a ribbon, and stepped out into the cold. The front door swung open before she could knock. Emily stood there, perfect as always, in a satin blouse that caught the foyer light like a magazine ad. And then came the look. Not anger, not indifference. It was worse. It was that brief, involuntary wrinkle of the nose, a twitch of distaste so quick it might have gone unnoticed if Pat hadn't spent decades recognizing it. "Did you even shower today, Mom?" Emily asked with a breezy, practiced grin that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her, Kevin hovered in the hallway, one hand scratching the back of his neck, his eyes flicking from Emily to Pat, then to the floor. Pat froze, her hands still wrapped around the cookie tin. There was a beat, just long enough for the silence to start burning, before she forced a light laugh. "I didn't realize there was a dress code for lasagna night." Emily smirked. "Not a dress code, just basic hygiene." Kevin's mouth opened slightly, but he didn't speak. Pat stepped inside. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air, a warm and cozy lie that didn't match the chills snaking down her spine. The walls gleamed, white and bare, punctuated by curated black and white photographs that looked like they came from a lifestyle catalog. The dining table was already set. White plates, wine glasses, cloth napkins folded with origami precision. She placed the tin on the counter, unacknowledged, and shrugged off her coat. No one offered to take it. Dinner passed in fits and starts. Pat chewed slowly, answering questions only when asked, her voice even, her smile just wide enough to be acceptable. Kevin offered to refill her glass once. Emily swatted his hand and did it herself. The insult stayed lodged in her chest like a splinter she couldn't stop touching. "So," Emily said halfway through the meal, slicing into a bread roll with surgical precision, "I finally bought it." Pat blinked. "Bought what?" Emily pushed her chair back slightly, lifting her wine glass. "The coat. The Ferragamo one I told you about. It's insane. Real Italian cashmere, tailored like it was made for me. Honestly, it feels like power." Kevin cleared his throat. Pat nodded. "Must be nice." Emily laughed. "Well, I work hard. And honestly, I deserve it. I mean, you always told me to save, save, save. But what's the point if you don't enjoy a little luxury?" Pat didn't answer. Because she had said that, when Emily was 19 and maxing out credit cards, she didn't understand. Pat had co-signed her first account. She'd walked her into the bank, told her how to build a credit score, how to think long-term. Not once had she asked for repayment. Emily reached for her phone, scrolling absently mid-meal. "I should show you a picture of the coat. It's online now, someone else bought the same one, but let's say it doesn't fit her body type as well." Kevin muttered something and stood to clear the dishes. Pat sat still, hands folded in her lap, eyes resting on the flickering pillar candles at the center of the table. She didn't taste the dessert, she didn't comment on the coat, and when Emily kissed her cheek perfunctorily at the door, Pat leaned away just enough to make it awkward. Back in her car, she sat for a moment with the engine off, her breath fogging up the windshield. Then, slowly, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document, one she hadn't looked at in years. A joint bank account statement, her name still printed neatly at the top beside Emily's. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Pat didn't sleep much that night. She lay on her back in the dark, the ceiling above her casting soft gray shadows, her bedroom still except for the low hum of the radiator. But inside her mind, there was a low, steady rumble. something old and long ignored starting to stir. By morning, her body moved before her thoughts had fully caught up. She padded into the living room in her robe, the laminate floor cold beneath her heels. The cookie tin from last night sat unopened on the counter. She slid it into the trash without a second thought. Back in the hall closet, tucked between an old sewing kit and a dusty box of light bulbs, was the green accordion folder. She hadn't touched it in years, not since before Gerald died. She carried it to the kitchen table like it was something breakable. The label on the front still read, Emily, Banking Docs. Pat opened it. Her eyes scanned line after line of yellowing paper, loan approvals, deposit slips, statements with long expired dates. And then there it was. Crisp and slightly off-white, like it had avoided the dust somehow, a joint account agreement co-signed at a branch on Hennepin Avenue. Her name was there, clean and legible, Patricia Miller, right next to Emily L. Miller. She stared at it for a long time. How many years had it been since she'd thought about that account? She'd opened it to help Emily qualify for her first apartment, back when Emily was still taking her advice and returning her calls. They had even gone to lunch afterward. Emily had ordered a sandwich she couldn't pronounce, laughing the whole time. Pat swallowed hard and leaned back in her chair. It had to be closed, or converted. Surely Emily had taken her off the account once she got married. But there it was, her name, in black ink. She glanced at the time. Kaalai 10 மணி 12 நிமிடம். She reached for the landline on the kitchen wall. She still liked the feel of actual buttons, and dialed a number she hadn't used in at least 5 years. First Community Savings, Sandra speaking. The voice, still sharp and no nonsense, took her back instantly. Sandra Pike. Efficient. Unshakable. She'd been working the counter back when Pat and Gerald refinanced their condo. She was the kind of woman who wore sensible pumps and remembered your dog's name. Sandra, this is Pat Miller. I'm not sure if you'll remember me. Oh, Pat, Sandra said, a smile almost audible through the receiver. Of course I do. How are you holding up in this weather? Pat exhaled, warmth trickling into her voice despite herself. Doing all right. Listen, I have a question I'm hoping you can help me with. Shoot. I'm looking at paperwork from an old joint account, opened with my daughter Emily. I was wondering if my name is still active on it. Sandra didn't respond right away. I can check. Can you give me the account number or her full name and date of birth? Pat recited the details carefully, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. There was soft clicking in the background as Sandra typed. Finally, yep, you're still on the account. Same joint access privileges. Balance is active. Pat blinked. Still? Still. You're authorized to do anything on it. Withdraw, deposit, close it, anything. There was a pause. Pat could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Thanks, Sandra. That's good to know? Sandra hesitated. You want to come in and take a look at the details? I'm here until 5. Pat nodded slowly, though no one could see. I'll see you soon. She hung up and sat in silence. Snow began to tap lightly against the window pane, soft and persistent. Pat stared out at it like it was spelling something she hadn't yet learned to read. For years, she'd kept her head down, bit her tongue, told herself Emily was just busy, just stressed, just ambitious, told herself good mothers didn't demand things back. But now there was a door open, just a crack, but open. And Pat Miller had never been one to leave loose ends dangling. Pat brushed a hand over her coat twice before stepping inside the bank. She'd worn the navy wool one, not fancy, but respectable. It still held a faint trace of cedar from the closet. First Community Savings looked exactly as she remembered it. Polished tile floors, muted green chairs, and a wall-mounted TV playing silent local news. A bowl of mints sat at the reception desk, untouched. Banks didn't change much. People did. Sandra spotted her instantly and waved her over, her short gray bob bouncing slightly with the motion. You look good, Pat, she said warmly. Haven't aged a bit. Pat smiled politely. You always did have a good poker face. They shared a chuckle before Sandra motioned toward the private glass-paneled office in the corner. Pat followed, her sensible shoes quiet against the tile. Once inside, Sandra closed the door and pulled up the account on her dual monitor screen. She typed swiftly, glasses perched low on her nose. Pat sat across from her, hands folded, the leather chair stiff beneath her. "So," Sandra began, tapping the mouse, "here we are. Joint savings account ending in 9027. Opened in 2011. Still active. No changes to ownership." She turned the monitor slightly so Pat could see. And there it was, a number so large it didn't register at first. Pat leaned in, blinked, looked again. $148,672.17. She didn't react outwardly, but something inside her shifted. Her spine straightened almost imperceptibly. The air felt different in the room, sharper somehow. Sandra watched her closely. Pat ran her thumb along the inside edge of her palm, a habit from years back when she used to balance spreadsheets for 12 people's paychecks every week. "That's more than I expected." Sandra nodded once. "There've been consistent deposits, no major withdrawals, probably used more like a holding account than anything else." Pat let that settle. Her daughter had been growing wealth in an account they shared, all while mocking her for store-brand cookies and wrinkled cardigans, and never once mentioned it. Not a word. She cleared her throat softly. "If someone wanted to withdraw, say, a portion of that, is there a limit?" Sandra leaned back, folding her hands. "No limit. It's a joint account. Either party can withdraw any amount at any time. Technically, you could empty it and close it this afternoon if you wanted." Pat didn't flinch. "I see." She took another moment before meeting Sandra's eyes. "Can I get a printed statement? Full transaction history? Last 2 years?" Sandra smiled. "Already queued it up. Thought you might want that." She reached into the printer tray and handed Pat a neatly clipped packet. The weight of it in her hands felt solid, like something real after months of fading into the background. "Anything else I can help with?" Sandra asked. Pat stood slowly, placing the documents carefully into her leather purse. "Not today," she said, "but I appreciate your discretion." Sandra tilted her head. "Pat, I've known you a long time. I don't ask questions. You always handled things clean." There was no judgment in her tone, just something like quiet respect. Pat nodded once, then turned toward the exit. The heels of her shoes clicked more confidently on the tile this time. Outside, the snow was coming down harder, tiny white crystals dancing in the wind like ash. Pat zipped up her coat, clutching her purse a little closer. Inside it sat a quiet truth she hadn't known she needed, but now could never unsee. She didn't get in the car right away. Instead, she walked past it, down the sidewalk toward the corner diner, and as she pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, the bell above jingling, a familiar voice called out from behind the counter. "Well, I'll be damned. Look who's early for pie." Pat slid into the corner booth, her favorite one, the one with the radiator humming softly below the window and a chipped sugar caddy that Doris never bothered to replace. Snow clung to the glass outside in streaks, the kind of cold that could crack your bones if you let it in. Doris poured her coffee without asking. "You look like a woman who's already made a decision." Pat wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I have." She didn't elaborate. Doris didn't press. They sat quietly for a while, the clink of silverware and low chatter filling the space between them. Pat didn't touch her pie. She stared at it like it might disappear if she blinked. After 10 minutes, she stood up, slid a 5 under her saucer, and said, "I'll be back in an hour." Doris nodded once. "I'll keep your seat warm." Back at the bank, the fluorescent lights were still too bright, the waiting area still too quiet. Sandra met her at the door again, as if no time had passed. "Back already," she said, motioning her into the office. "Something I missed?" Pat pulled out the folder she'd brought from home. "Number, I just know what I want now." Sandra waited. "I'd like to transfer most of the joint balance into my personal savings," Pat said. Her tone was level, not rehearsed, but firm. "Leave just enough in there to keep it open for now." Sandra didn't blink. "You got it." She retrieved the form without commentary, sliding it across the desk with a pen. Pat picked it up, smoothed the corners. The form was short, a few blanks, some fine print. She filled it in with deliberate strokes, each number and signature crisp and legible. Her pen didn't shake once. When she handed it back, Sandra glanced it over, then turned to her terminal. "Let me run this through. I'll initiate a same-day internal transfer and prepare a cashier's check for the remaining balance if that works for you." Pat nodded. "That's fine." A faint hum filled the room as the printer warmed up. Sandra retrieved the documents, stapled them in neat packets, and handed them over. Pat leafed through them carefully. Pages of confirmation, routing codes, a summary of the remaining joint balance, just under $2,000. Enough to keep it active, enough to not raise immediate suspicion. Sandra set the check down between them. The amount was printed clean and centered. A small fortune that had never been spoken aloud. "I'm going to say this once," Sandra said quietly. "Everything you've done is legal. It's your money, your name, your right." Pat looked at her. "That's all I needed to hear." She slid the check into her purse, fastened the clasp, and stood. She didn't linger. Outside, the air had turned brutal. The wind swept snow into whirling sheets that stung her face, but she walked anyway. 2 blocks to the diner, the check pressed flat against her chest under her coat like a second heart. The bell chimed again as she stepped back inside. Doris glanced up, wiping her hands on a towel. Pat dropped into the booth with a heavy exhale. Doris raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Pat pulled off her gloves. "I was never much for long speeches." Doris poured her a fresh cup. "No receipt needed?" Pat offered a faint smile. "I've got all the proof I need." They sat quietly again, steam rising from both mugs. Finally, Doris leaned in. "So, what are you going to do with it?" Pat didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, where a father dragged a red sled across a snow-blanketed sidewalk, a bundled-up toddler laughing behind him. She watched them until they disappeared behind a parked SUV. Then, softly, without turning her head, she said, "Something Emily would never see coming." The sun had set, though it was barely past 7. Pat stood at the kitchen sink, slowly drying a dish with a soft cotton towel that had long since lost its color. Outside, the snow had grown heavier, blanketing the world in an early, eerie quiet. The only sound was the gentle clink of ceramic and the occasional creak of her old radiator. Then the phone rang. The sound sliced through the stillness with sharp urgency. She dried her hands, not rushing, not hesitating either, and walked over to the counter where her phone lay. The screen glowed. Emily. Mobile. She stared at it for a moment. She had expected this, just not so soon. With a calm breath, she picked up and answered. "What did you do?" Emily's voice came in hot and breathless, without any greeting, without pretense. Pat held the phone to her ear, leaning slightly against the edge of the counter. "Hello to you too." "Don't play games," Emily snapped. "You think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't check the balance and see it's practically empty?" Pat looked out the window at the drifting snow and said evenly, "You left my name on that account." There was a pause on the line, then a laugh. Sharp, incredulous. "You're really going to hide behind that? Technically it's yours too, right? That's what you're going to tell yourself?" "I don't need to tell myself anything," Pat said quietly. "The paperwork tells me enough." "You had no right," Emily spat. "I built that savings. I worked for every dollar in there while you, I don't know, sorted coupons or made casseroles for church luncheons." Pat's grip on the counter didn't tighten, and her voice remained steady. "You're mistaken if you think I didn't work. I worked most of my life, some of those years to make your life easier." From the background came a muffled voice, Kevin's, trying to cut through. "Emily, stop yelling." "Stay out of it!" Emily hissed at him, her voice now distant, as if she'd turned away from the phone. "You knew she was unstable." Pat's eyes flicked upward at that word. When Emily returned to the call, her tone had dropped an octave, more restrained but no less bitter. "You've lost your mind. You really think draining our account like some petty jealous—" "I'm not jealous," Pat interrupted, her voice soft, almost gentle, but with a weight behind it. "And I didn't drain anything. I moved what I was legally entitled to. If you didn't want me to access it, you should have removed my name when you started using it like it was yours alone." "You're unbelievable," Emily muttered. You're spiteful, small, and honestly, you're pathetic. I hope that money keeps you warm, Mom, because you've just burned every bridge you had left." Pat let the silence stretch for a few seconds before replying, "Then I guess it's good I don't mind the cold." There was a long pause on the other end. For a moment, Pat thought Emily might hang up. Instead, her daughter's voice came back, low and trembling with fury. "You're going to regret this." "No," Pat said, her tone quiet but final. "I don't think I will." Then, without waiting for another word, she pressed the red button and ended the call. She stood for a while in the kitchen, phone still in hand, the ticking of the old wall clock filling the space around her. Her body didn't feel tight or tense, just alert, like something had shifted inside her and settled into place. The kettle clicked off behind her with a soft hiss. She moved on instinct, pouring water into a mug with her favorite tea bag, the scent of lemon balm rising gently into the air. She took the mug to the table, sat down slowly, and stared into the steam curling upward like a ribbon. A few minutes passed before the phone buzzed again. One text message. From Kevin. She opened it. "Kevin, she never told me your name was still on it." Pat stared at the words, rereading them slowly. There was no apology, no defense, just truth. And it was the first real one she'd heard from anyone in that house in a very, very long time. It was late afternoon when the knock came, not the gentle, neighborly kind that announced a friend dropping by with a casserole or a borrowed book. No, this was harder. Impatient, rapid, echoing through the small condo like a warning bell. Pat had just pulled her second batch of folded laundry from the dryer and was setting it into the basket when she heard it. She didn't hurry. She placed the basket down neatly by the couch, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and walked slowly to the door. Through the peephole, she saw Emily. Alone. Her daughter's face was tight with anger, her jaw clenched so hard the muscles at her temples were visible. Her coat was unzipped despite the cold, her phone clutched in one gloved hand, eyes darting around the hallway as though patience had become a foreign language. Pat opened the door halfway, letting the bitter air and tension sweep in together. "I figured you'd at least have the decency to answer your phone," Emily said, pushing past her before she was invited in. The scent of expensive perfume trailed in behind her, sharp, citrusy, and completely at odds with the cozy warmth of Pat's small condo. "I wasn't ignoring you," Pat replied, closing the door gently. "I was doing laundry." Emily scoffed. "Of course, how quaint." She turned on her heel in the middle of the living room, her boots leaving faint wet circles on the hardwood floor. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Pat moved toward the kitchenette, her movements measured, composed. "You'll have to be more specific." Emily dropped her bag onto the arm of the couch, her voice climbing. "You ruined us. Do you understand that? That money was our cushion, our savings for IVF, a down payment on a bigger place, emergency expenses. Kevin and I had plans." Pat paused at the coffee maker. "And yet I was never part of those plans, not even in name. Until now." Emily's face flushed with frustration. "You were on paper, Mom, not in reality. That account was just a formality. You weren't supposed to. God, it's insane that I even have to explain this." Pat turned around, holding 2 mugs. "I think you've done plenty of explaining already." Emily narrowed her eyes but didn't speak. Pat set one mug down on the table and walked slowly to the small side cabinet beneath the window. From it, she withdrew a manila folder, thick and neatly labeled, and placed it beside the untouched mug. "I made copies," Pat said, sitting down. "Bank documents, joint authorization, deposit records, transfer history, everything legal, everything transparent, just in case you try to tell someone a different version of this." Emily didn't sit. She hovered, glaring at the folder like it might burn her fingers. "So this is your gotcha moment? This is your way of punishing me? Because I hurt your feelings?" Pat looked up at her, her face calm, almost sad. "Number. It's not about feelings. It's about facts." Emily swallowed, her throat moving visibly. Her confidence cracked slightly, like hairline fractures forming beneath the surface. She reached for the folder, opened it, and skimmed the first few pages. Her expression shifted. Her breath hitched. She hadn't expected the level of documentation. She hadn't expected the clarity. When she spoke again, her voice was softer but no less sharp. "You don't know what you've set in motion." "I know exactly what I've done," Pat said, rising to pour more coffee. "I've reminded you I exist." The sound of a second knock startled them both, muffled but unmistakable. Pat looked toward the door, then back at Emily. "You expecting someone?" Emily shook her head once, lips tight. Pat crossed the room and opened the door. Kevin stood in the hall, his shoulders hunched, cheeks red from the cold, holding a shopping bag like a peace offering. He looked from Pat to Emily, then quickly down at the floor. I didn't think you'd both be here," he said, his voice low. Pat stepped aside wordlessly, letting him in. Emily, still standing, crossed her arms but didn't say anything. Kevin moved slowly toward the couch, hesitated, then sat down on the edge like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. His eyes flicked to the folder. He recognized it. "I got your text," he said to Pat. She nodded once. "You came anyway." He nodded back. "I needed to see it for myself." Emily looked between them, her voice trembling now with something new. Uncertainty. "You're not seriously taking her side." Kevin looked up, his eyes tired but clear. "I'm not taking sides," he said. "But maybe it's time we stop pretending she doesn't have one." The heat had risen too high in the condo, not from the radiator but from the pressure of unsaid things, of decades buried beneath politeness and obligation. Pat moved to crack the window behind the couch an inch, just enough to let a ribbon of cold air drift in. The room was oddly quiet for a moment, Kevin sitting stiffly on the edge of the couch, Emily still standing, arms crossed like armor. The manila folder rested between them, unopened now but undeniably present. The bell above the front door jingled. Doris stepped in, letting herself in the way old friends do when they've been doing it for 20 years. She didn't pause when she saw the trio, just gave a slow, amused once-over as she unwound her knit scarf. "Well, if this isn't a Sunday school painting-turned-murder mystery," she said, brushing snow off her sleeves, "I brought apple crumble." Pat smiled, small and genuine, and took the foil-covered dish from her. "Right on time." Emily blinked. "You invited someone over now?" Doris looked her up and down, unbothered. "I live around the corner, honey. I show up when I smell smoke. Figured someone should bring sugar to the fire." Emily let out a disbelieving breath and turned away, rubbing her temple. Doris removed her coat slowly and settled into the recliner across from the couch like she owned the place. She set her purse down with a gentle thud and gave Kevin a nod. "You look like a man who'd rather be anywhere else." Kevin gave a weak chuckle. "You're not wrong." "I usually am not." Pat returned with plates and coffee. She didn't ask who wanted what. She simply placed a plate in front of Doris and Kevin and set hers on the small table in front of her armchair. Emily didn't sit. "Is this what we're doing now?" Emily finally snapped, voice sharp with disbelief. "Coffee and pie like nothing's happened? This is ridiculous." Pat sipped slowly, not looking up. "We can have a conversation without turning it into a courtroom." "Funny," Emily said, her voice rising again. "You didn't seem interested in conversations before you pulled a stunt behind my back." Kevin shifted slightly. Then, as if it had been weighing on him the whole time, he spoke. "Can I see it?" Pat looked up at him. His face wasn't angry, just tired, curious, maybe even wary. She handed the folder over without hesitation. Emily turned on him. "Kevin, don't—" "I need to understand what happened," he said gently, not looking at her. He opened the folder and started reading, page by page, his eyes moving slowly over the details. Dates, signatures, balances, authorizations. The room settled into a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional clink of Doris's fork against the plate and the quiet rustle of pages turning. When he reached the last page, Kevin set the folder down beside him and leaned back into the couch with a sigh. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he looked at Pat and gave a single, grim nod. Emily's face twisted in disbelief. "Seriously? You're validating this?" "I'm not validating anything," Kevin said, still calm. "I'm just saying, it's all there. You knew she was still on the account. And if you didn't, well, that's on both of us." Emily's cheeks flushed with something too tangled to name. Shock, guilt, rage. This is my life, my family. You think she deserves to just take whatever she wants? Pat met her daughter's eyes, her voice quiet but steady. I think I deserve respect. The words hung in the room, unshaken, simple as truth. Doris looked up from her plate. And I think if she was a man, you wouldn't be calling it stealing. You'd be calling it financial literacy. Emily turned away sharply, staring out the cracked window like she could escape through it. Pat stood and walked to the kitchen, refilling her mug, then Kevin's. Her hands didn't shake. You can stay, she said softly over her shoulder. Or you can go. But yelling won't rewrite the paperwork, and pretending I was never part of your life doesn't change the fact that I still am. Emily didn't respond. Kevin sat, silent, fingers steepled beneath his chin, and Doris, sipping her coffee like she was watching a play unfold in real time, murmured, Well, this just got more interesting. 3 days passed before the ripple reached her. It began with a ding, an alert from a social media app Pat rarely opened, mostly used to track local weather groups and photos of her friend Linda's grandchildren. But there it was, clear as day. Emily Miller-Jones posted an update. Pat's thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't open it, but she saw the first line of the post in the preview window. Imagine realizing the person who raised you is capable of betraying you so deeply, it feels like a death. The words didn't sting. Not really. They puzzled her, as if Emily had written a line in a language only she believed existed. Later that afternoon, while organizing her spice rack, Pat received the first message. A woman named Candace, someone she remembered vaguely from Emily's college days, too much eyeliner, always on her phone. Hi, Mrs. Miller. I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but just wanted to say I'm thinking of you. Families are complicated. Pat didn't respond. The second message came that evening from one of Emily's colleagues, a woman with a professional headshot as her profile picture and a handle full of hashtags about wellness and mindful motherhood. Sending love. If you ever need someone to talk to, I know it must be a tough time. That one she deleted without reading the rest. The third was from someone anonymous. No profile picture, no context. You should be ashamed. Pat simply turned off her notifications. At the diner the next morning, Doris refilled both their coffee mugs before Pat could even ask. The counter was empty except for the two of them, and soft jazz hummed from the old speaker overhead. She's loud, Doris said, settling across from her. But she's sloppy, and loud sloppy never wins long term. Pat stirred cream into her coffee. I haven't said a word back. That seems to bother her more than anything else. Doris grinned. Nothing drives her madder than silence. Same was true when she was 10. You remember that tantrum she threw over the church play? Pat smirked. Because I wouldn't let her be the angel. She wanted to wear wings and throw glitter. She ended up throwing a hymnal at the piano, Doris said, laughing softly. Some things don't change. They just evolve into hashtags. Pat let herself laugh, too, quiet and short-lived but real. By the time she returned home, the condo felt unusually still, not empty, peaceful. The phone was silent. No messages, no new notifications. Emily had clearly moved on to another stage of the public performance, vague quotes, curated heartbreak, maybe even spiritual reposts about boundaries and forgiveness. But Kevin hadn't posted a thing. That evening, just before dinner time, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she knew the rhythm of the area code. She answered. Hi, came Kevin's voice. Tentative, careful. I hope this isn't a bad time. Pat moved to the kitchen window where snow had started falling again, slow and thick, sticking to the railing outside. Number, go ahead. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For what? For not stepping in sooner, he said. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, that it was between you and Emily. But that account, those decisions, I benefited from them too. And I should have known where the money came from. Should have asked. Pat let the silence stretch gently. She didn't rush to forgive. She didn't rush to speak. I don't expect you to say anything, Kevin added. I just wanted you to hear it from me. She breathed in deeply, then exhaled. Thank you, Kevin. He paused. If you ever need anything, help around the condo, groceries, I don't know, fixing a leaky faucet, You can call me. You don't have to do everything alone." "That's kind of you," Pat said, her voice soft. "But I'm not alone." After they hung up, she took her coat from the hook by the door and stepped outside. The air was quiet and sharp, filled with the hush that only deep snow could bring. Her boots left neat prints on the sidewalk as she walked slowly toward the lake. Street lamps cast long shadows across the blanketed road, the light catching the frost in the air like fireflies. Her pace was slow, deliberate, the kind of walk that didn't need a destination. For the first time in weeks, her thoughts weren't tangled. They were clean, still, like the street before her. And behind her, somewhere she couldn't see, Emily was spinning in a storm of her own making. The law office smelled like old paper and polished wood, the kind of place where nothing ever changed too quickly. Pat sat in a leather chair that had worn down just enough to be comfortable, the arms smoothed by decades of other people's anxieties and inheritances. Robert Lane, gray-bearded and deliberate, leaned back behind his desk, reading over the document Pat had handed him. He wore the same tan corduroy blazer he'd worn when helping her and Gerald update their wills 12 years earlier. Some people aged, others just settled deeper into who they already were. "I can't say I've seen this particular situation play out before," Robert murmured, flipping the last page and setting the packet aside. "But it's clean, clear. You were well within your rights." Pat nodded. "That's what Sandra said. She was right." He folded his hands, thoughtful. "Now the question is, what would you like to do with it?" Pat didn't answer right away. She looked out the window instead, where downtown Minneapolis stood cold and still, the sidewalk outside crusted with weeks-old snow that refused to melt. People walked quickly, bundled up and looking down, their breath visible with each step. "When I helped Emily open that account," Pat began, "I thought I was doing the right thing, helping her get on her feet. No interest, no strings. Just trust." Robert didn't interrupt. "But that money," she continued, "it grew with her life. Promotions, raises, bonus checks, all going into a shared account with my name still stamped on top, like a ghost." She reached into her purse and pulled out a single folded sheet. "I want to create something living with it." He unfolded the paper, scanned it. "A local scholarship?" "For girls who've aged out of the foster system," Pat said. "For the ones who got forgotten. Community college or vocational school. Something useful. Something with structure." Robert raised an eyebrow, then nodded slowly. "It's a good idea, and a wise use of the funds, if you're ready to let most of it go." "I don't need most of it," Pat said. "I just want enough for a roof over my head and the freedom to never ask anyone's permission again." Robert slid a fresh packet toward her. "Then we'll set up a revocable trust. We'll keep a modest amount in your name for emergencies, medical, housing, and the rest we'll earmark for the scholarship. I'll draft the documents and notarize them today." Pat didn't hesitate. She pulled the pen from her purse, signed each line where he marked with gentle taps. "Your estate documents?" he asked once she was done. "Let's update them too," she said. "Remove Emily. I'll leave something small to Kevin. He's been kind when he didn't have to be. The rest will go to the trust." Robert nodded. "I'll get the revisions started this afternoon." Pat stood, smoothing her coat as she did. "Thank you, Robert." "You're doing something good here," he said, standing to walk her to the door. "Better than most people would have." She didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. Back on the street, the cold bit sharper than it had in days, but Pat welcomed it. It made her feel alive, present, like she was occupying space in her own life again, not drifting inside someone else's story. She took her time walking home, stopping once at a bakery for a fresh loaf of sourdough, and again at the florist, where she picked up a small arrangement of wintergreens. Her fingers tingled from the cold as she fumbled with the door to her condo building. She'd just stepped inside, warm air wrapping around her like a thick quilt, when a knock came at the door behind her. She turned. Kevin stood there, shoulders stiff, eyes wide and uncertain. He looked like he'd run the whole way from wherever he parked, snow still clinging to the seams of his coat. "Kevin?" He nodded once. "I was in the neighborhood. I figured I'd try my luck." She stepped aside to let him in, unsure what had brought him this time. He didn't sit. He didn't even take off his coat. "I thought you should know," he said, his voice quiet but raw. She's threatening divorce. Pat blinked, not in surprise, in realization. Kevin wasn't here to gossip. He wasn't here for comfort. He was here because the cracks had finally reached the foundation. The phone rang 4 times the next morning. Pat didn't answer once. She heard it clearly, sharp against the quiet hum of her condo, but she never turned her head. Each ring was followed by a chime that signaled a voicemail she wouldn't listen to. Then silence again, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She sat in her usual chair by the front window, a blanket over her legs, the spine of an old novel cracked open in her lap. It was a book she'd read before, years ago when Gerald was still alive and Emily still visited without needing an excuse, but today the words felt newer somehow. Clean, like someone had dusted off the part of her brain that used to be hers alone. Outside, a light snow was falling again, the flakes landing softly on the bare branches of the trees. A mail truck eased to a stop down the block. Someone walked a Labrador in a bright red jacket. The world moved gently, without her needing to be in it. She heard the key in the lock before she heard the footsteps. Doris let herself in without knocking. She always did. "Hope you've got the kettle on," she said, setting a bag of cranberry scones on the kitchen counter. "I brought the good ones. The kind that pretend to be healthy." Pat smiled faintly without looking up from her book. "You're early." Doris dropped her coat over the back of the dining chair. "You're predictable." Pat rose and moved to the kitchen without speaking. A few minutes later they sat across from each other with mismatched mugs and steaming tea, the scones resting between them on a chipped floral plate. "Any more drama?" Doris asked, breaking a piece off her scone. Pat didn't answer immediately. She stirred her tea and stared at the tiny whirlpool in the cup. "She keeps calling," she said finally. Doris snorted. "Of course she does. That woman's allergic to consequences. She's not used to being ignored." "Well," Doris said, sipping, "you should keep ignoring her. That's the only language she doesn't speak fluently." Pat nodded, but slowly. "It's not that I enjoy it. The silence. It's just necessary. Like stopping a leak before it floods the house." "She'll learn," Doris said. "Or she won't. But either way, that's not your burden anymore." They drank quietly for a while, the morning sun glinting weakly through the window. It was the kind of cold that didn't bite. It lingered. Minnesota knew how to stretch out winter like an apology that never arrived. Pat's phone buzzed again. She didn't look, but she could tell from the rhythm of it that it was another message, likely a 5th or 6th from Emily. The past few had come wrapped in indirect phrases, quotes about betrayal, posts about chosen families, hashtags about self-care. It was a performance, a desperate one, and Pat, finally, wasn't in the audience. That afternoon, Kevin stopped by. Pat saw him through the window before he knocked, a grocery bag dangling from one hand. She opened the door before he could lift it. He looked tired, truly tired, like whatever was happening behind his front door had started to take root under his skin. "I brought soup," he said, "and a baguette. I wasn't sure if you'd eaten." "I have," Pat replied, stepping aside, "but thank you." He didn't stay long, just set the bag on the counter and stood awkwardly near the door. "She won't stop talking about you," he said finally. "Online, in the house, at work even. People are getting uncomfortable." "I imagine that's her goal," Pat said. Kevin nodded. "Probably." He looked down at his hands. "She doesn't want help. She wants control. And when she loses it, she tears through whatever's closest." Pat leaned against the counter, watching him carefully. "And are you still close?" Kevin hesitated, the answer blooming slowly across his face. "I don't know," he said. "But I know this much. I respect what you did." "I should have said that sooner." Pat's eyes softened slightly. "It means more now." He gave her a half smile, unsure and sad, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "If she keeps spiraling? If she does something reckless?" "I'm not afraid of fallout," Pat said gently. "I've already stood in the fire." He nodded once and left without another word. That night, Pat sat in the dark, the television off, her book closed. The silence wasn't soothing anymore. It buzzed around her like static. And for the first time since this all began, she wondered, not with fear, but with quiet curiosity, just how far Emily might go. The moving van was unmarked, the kind that blended into the Minneapolis winter like salt stains on pavement. Pat watched it through her window, steam curling from her mug, as two men carried boxes from the back of the truck into a modest brick rental across the street. Kevin stood beside the open door, directing them with quiet gestures. His coat flapped in the wind, his shoulders hunched more from weariness than weather. He didn't wave, neither did Pat, but they saw each other. She sipped her tea and didn't move from her seat. It wasn't a surprise, not after what he'd said, not after the silence that had followed it, and still, it landed like a weight being set down. Not dropped, just released. Across town, Emily was burning down the internet. Pat knew this not because she checked, but because others told her, indirectly and often unwillingly. A neighbor stopped her in the hallway to say, "I didn't realize your daughter was, having a rough time," then pretended to be distracted by a phone call. The diner had been no better. "She's posted 3 times today," Doris said, dropping into the booth opposite her with a plate of fries and 2 forks. The latest one said, and I quote, "When people show you who they really are, believe them, especially if they birthed you." Pat didn't flinch. "At least she's poetic." Doris snorted. "She's a walking Pinterest board having a nervous breakdown." Pat didn't reply. She dipped a fry in ketchup, her motions slow and deliberate. "You're not worried?" Doris asked, her voice softer now. "Not anymore," Pat said. Doris leaned back, appraising her. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one you had the day after Gerald's funeral, like something heavy finally left the room." Pat let the words sit between them, warm and accurate. Later that evening, Doris came over with a chilled bottle of cheap champagne and a tiny lemon pie from the bakery 3 blocks down. "No occasion," she claimed, placing the pie on the table. "Just seemed like time to celebrate. Something." Pat raised an eyebrow as she fetched 2 mismatched glasses. "You always bring the good stuff." Doris poured. "This was $10. I want you to lower your expectations." They toasted with quiet clinks and soft laughter. The bubbles fizzed like something distant and light. For the first time in weeks, Pat didn't feel braced for the next blow. "I feel," she said slowly, "like I can exhale without asking for permission." "That," Doris said, tipping her glass, "is worth celebrating." The call came just past 9. Pat saw Kevin's name on the screen and picked up after the second ring. His voice was clearer now, less brittle. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "For what?" "For showing me what was real and what wasn't." Pat sat back in her chair, her bare feet resting against the warm radiator. "That was never my goal." "I know," Kevin said. "That's why it worked." There was a pause. Then he added, "It's quiet here, and I'm not sure if that's good or bad yet, but I can breathe in it." "You'll figure it out," Pat said. "I think I already have," he replied. She heard him smile through the phone, a tired, honest smile. After they hung up, Pat set her phone down, stood, and turned off the lamp beside her chair. The condo dimmed, bathed now only in the faint golden wash from the streetlights outside. She walked to the window, pulled back the curtain slightly, and looked across the street. The lights were on in Kevin's rental. A silhouette passed in front of the window. Him, probably setting down a box or unpacking a lamp. Building something new, slowly, carefully. She let the curtain fall and turned toward the kitchen, her steps light, the silence no longer ringing. But behind her, her phone buzzed once. A new voicemail. The caller ID read, "Emily." Pat stared at it, unmoving. She didn't delete it, not yet. The office looked the same as it had 2 weeks ago. Same soft leather chairs, same smell of legal paper and lemon oil polish. But the air felt different now. This time, Pat came with no hesitation. She moved with the calm of someone who had already buried her grief and folded the dirt flat. Robert stood when she entered, one hand tucked in his blazer pocket, the other holding a slim stack of documents. "Morning, Pat," he said gently. "I have everything ready." She nodded once. "Let's do it." The chair sighed beneath her as she sat. She placed her gloves neatly beside her purse on the desk. No rush, no performance. just a woman choosing her legacy with both eyes open. Robert slid the folder across to her. "You're sure?" "Yes," she said, no waver in her voice. "I want her removed." He tapped the top corner. "Initial there, and sign on the next page." She signed without pause, her handwriting calm and legible, like every check she'd ever written at the kitchen table with the light on low and the radio humming. "And Kevin?" Robert asked, sliding the second page forward. Pat took a breath. "Leave him something modest, enough for a kindness to be acknowledged. No more, no less." Robert nodded. "And the trust?" She placed the final document on top. "Everything else goes there. I don't want it tied to my name in a flashy way. Quiet funding, quiet opportunity." Robert looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, not with judgment, but with curiosity. "Do you want to leave her a letter?" "No." She reached for her gloves. "She knows how to read bank statements. Let her read this one." He gave a soft exhale through his nose. "All right, then." A moment later, the notary entered. An older woman in a red cable-knit sweater, efficient and silent. She verified, stamped, and slid the pages back into the manila envelope with practiced rhythm. It was done in less than 10 minutes. "I'll file it today," Robert said, walking her to the door. "If you change your mind—" "I won't." He offered a faint smile. "I didn't think you would." Pat stepped outside into downtown Minneapolis, the wind sharp and biting as it tore around the corners of the building, but the cold didn't reach her the way it used to. Her coat was buttoned, her boots firm against the salted sidewalk. Inside, her thoughts were quiet. There was no soundtrack, no rage, no tears. Only clarity. She passed a coffee shop with steamed-up windows and people hunched over laptops. A mother pushing a stroller stopped to adjust a baby's hat. Life went on. That was the miracle and the indifference of it all. She paused outside a bookstore with a wintry display in the window, titles about resilience, fresh starts, the kind of curated hope that sold well in January. A small red sticker in the corner advertised a clearance sale. It struck her then, absurdly, that Emily might see this decision, this erasure from her mother's will, as the ultimate cruelty. As if the silence that followed it would echo louder than anything Pat had said out loud. But it wasn't silence. It was a statement, final and binding. A document with weight and permanence. And somewhere inside a law office, that truth was now cataloged, copied, and filed. As she crossed the street, her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. She didn't check it right away. She walked half a block, passing beneath a scaffold hung with melting icicles, before finally slipping the phone from her pocket. One new voicemail. Again, Emily. No transcription. Just that name. Like a knock she didn't feel obligated to answer anymore. Pat slid the phone away without opening it. She stood still on the sidewalk, letting the wind whip across her cheeks, watching as the city moved around her, indifferent, unbothered, alive. Her hand brushed against the inner pocket of her coat, where the notarized papers still sat, neatly folded. She closed her eyes briefly and smiled. It was just after noon when Doris dropped by, cheeks flushed from the cold, and a knit beanie slouched over one ear. She didn't knock, she never did, but she entered gently, as if she could feel the stillness in Pat's condo before crossing the threshold. Pat was rearranging the stack of donation envelopes she'd prepared for the scholarship fund. She looked up as Doris shrugged off her coat and tossed it over the arm of a chair. "I come bearing gossip," Doris said, peeling off her gloves, "and biscotti." Pat raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous combination. They cancel each other out." Doris pulled a biscotti from her coat pocket like a magician with a prop. "Want to hear it?" "I'm not sure I have a choice." Doris grinned, then softened. "Kevin's seeing someone." Pat paused, not in surprise, but in quiet acknowledgement. "She good to him?" she asked. Doris nodded. "He met her at that community gardening workshop. You know, the one with the composting nerds and too many canvas totes. Her name's Elise, works with adults with disabilities, volunteers on the weekends, soft voice, strong spine." Pat smiled faintly. "Sounds like someone who knows how to stand still in a storm." "Exactly." Doris moved into the kitchen, rummaging for tea like she owned the place. "They're not rushing anything, but it's easy, from what I hear. calm. Pat thought of the rental house across the street, the glow of Kevin's lamp in the window, the absence of shouting, the presence of breath. She said nothing. Doris glanced over. "You okay?" "I am," Pat said, "and I want him to be too." The phone rang late that night, no caller ID, but Pat already knew. She answered on the second ring. There was no yelling this time, no fury, just a long inhale and a voice she hadn't heard in this register since Emily was 10 years old and came home with a scraped knee and a broken promise from a friend. "Mom?" Pat didn't speak. She waited. I know you probably don't want to talk. I wouldn't if I were you, but I need to say this. Please." The voice cracked. Not performative. Not rehearsed. "Everything's falling apart. Kevin's gone. Half my clients won't return my calls because of the things I posted. I'm tired of being angry, and I don't even know how to stop. You were right, okay? About everything." Pat listened. "I was horrible to you, and I kept justifying it by telling myself you didn't need anything from me, that you were always fine on your own. But I wasn't fine, and I didn't know how to be, and instead of asking you for help, I punished you for existing." There was silence on the line, the kind that feels like someone biting their lip, swallowing the words that almost didn't make it out. "Please, just add me back, to the will, or to the account, or something. Just don't erase me." Pat's voice was quiet, steady. "Respect was free," she said. "You chose mockery." A beat, then a breath, and she hung up. The next morning, Pat walked the check to the bank in her coat pocket, the first installment of the scholarship fund. She handed it to the teller with hands that didn't shake. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about momentum, about building something forward-facing. The teller handed her a receipt and smiled. "Would you like to name the fund, ma'am?" Pat paused, then smiled softly. "The Gerald Miller Fund. He taught shop class, said every girl should know how to weld before she's married." The teller laughed. "That's kind of amazing." Pat tucked the receipt into her purse like a ribbon from a long race. That night, she lit a fire in the living room hearth and sat curled beneath a blanket, the quiet of the condo no longer oppressive, but earned. The flames flickered, casting shadows on the walls. She read until the book slipped from her lap, listened to the wind knock lightly against the windows, breathed. She was halfway through her tea when her phone buzzed. "Kevin," a single text message. "We're getting married next Friday, just the courthouse. Quiet. Elise wants to meet you. Will you come?" Pat stared at the screen. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not the soft, polite kind, but a full, rounded smile that reached her eyes. The kind of smile she hadn't worn in years. The Hennepin County Courthouse was built like it had something to prove. Tall stone columns, cold marble floors, a sense of history that didn't bend for sentiment. But inside courtroom 4B, the world had shrunk to something soft and human. Pat sat on the second bench from the front, her gloved hands resting on a small purse in her lap. She wore a dark blue dress with a matching wool coat and a silver pin that used to belong to her mother. Simple, appropriate, enough. Kevin stood near the bench, his suit slightly wrinkled, his shoes buffed but worn. He looked more rested than he had in weeks, like his face had finally remembered how to unclench. Beside him stood Elise. She wore a pale green wrap dress, winter boots, and no veil. Her hair was twisted back in a low bun, a few strands tucked behind her ear. She wasn't flashy or fragile, just grounded, present. Her smile, when it landed on Pat, was real. "You must be Pat," Elise said softly. Pat stood and extended her hand. Elise ignored it and pulled her into a gentle hug. "I've been looking forward to meeting you," Elise said. "Kevin talks about you like you taught him everything good he knows." Pat felt something catch in her throat. She swallowed it. "He gives me too much credit," she replied. "He says the same thing," Elise said, laughing lightly. The judge arrived 5 minutes late, carrying a thermos and an expression that said he'd seen every kind of couple come through these doors. Some radiant, some unsure, some already undone before the ink dried. But Kevin and Elise stood hand in hand, calm and steady. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. There were no grand speeches, no sweeping music, Just two people making a promise in a room that would forget them by sundown. But Pat would remember. The cafe down the block had rearranged its back corner to accommodate the small party, 8 people total, a few of Elise's co-workers, one of Kevin's old college friends, Doris, of course, who arrived 15 minutes late with a camera around her neck and a gift bag that rattled, like it contained something unwrapped and breakable. "I brought candlesticks," she declared, setting the bag down beside Kevin's chair. "Every couple needs a fire hazard." Everyone laughed. The cafe had mismatched chairs, exposed brick, and a chalkboard menu that listed half the items as seasonal. Pat ordered a tuna melt and a black coffee. Doris ordered sparkling cider for the table. When the food came, Kevin stood and tapped his fork against a glass. Just one quick thing. He looked at Elise, then at the table. "I just want to thank everyone here. It's been a year, but today feels like the first page of something I actually want to keep reading." He turned to Pat, and for a second the noise around them dimmed. "And thank you," he said, "for showing me what real love looks like, even when it's messy. Especially then." Pat felt her cheeks warm. She didn't look away. After he sat, Doris raised her glass. "I think it's Pat's turn." Pat blinked. "My what?" "Your toast," Doris said, pointing her phone at her. "Make it good. I'm recording." Pat stood slowly, adjusting the napkin in her lap before setting it aside. She didn't have anything written. Didn't need to. "I've never given a toast at a wedding," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I never had one of my own. Gerald and I eloped. Justice of the peace, 2 witnesses we didn't know, and a pair of ham sandwiches in the front seat of a Buick." Soft laughter rippled around the table. "But if I could go back and choose any kind of wedding, it would look like this. Small, honest, full of laughter and fire hazards." Doris sniffed beside her. "Elise, you have a kind heart. I saw it the moment you looked at me like I wasn't just a piece of Kevin's past. And Kevin, I don't know who you'll be with her beside you, but I think I'm going to like him." Glasses clinked. Elise wiped at the corner of her eye. Kevin smiled like a man who'd learned to be unafraid of joy. Doris snapped pictures throughout, calling out, "Say property division," instead of cheese. Later that evening, after the last dish had been cleared and the goodbyes had stretched long enough to be sincere, Pat stepped out into the cold. Snow had begun to fall again, thick, slow flakes that caught in her lashes and melted against her cheeks. She walked a block past the courthouse before stopping beneath a street lamp that flickered weakly above. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. No new messages, no new calls, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't waiting for one. The bank was quiet that morning, just the muffled sound of printers ticking behind glass cubicles and a soft instrumental version of an 80s love song playing overhead. Pat stood in line behind a man depositing coins in paper wrappers and a teenager nervously asking about opening his first checking account. She didn't mind the wait. Her gloves were in her coat pocket, her purse was light, her heart was lighter. When she reached the counter, Sandra looked up and smiled the kind of smile that wasn't customer service required. "Well, look who made it in before lunch for once." Pat smiled. "Thought I'd surprise you." "You've got a solid balance now," Sandra said as she pulled up the account. "Better than most." "I've had help," Pat said. She handed over the check, modest but meaningful, the second donation installment for the scholarship fund. Sandra whistled low under her breath. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Pat replied. Sandra slid the check into the machine, tapped a few keys, and gave a small nod. "Done, just like that." Pat tucked her receipt away without looking at it. She didn't need numbers to tell her she was okay. As she turned to leave, Sandra called after her, "You're the quiet kind of wealthy now, you know." Pat paused, smiled faintly over her shoulder. "That's the only kind worth being." The diner was busy, Friday lunch crowd busy, but Doris had claimed their booth in the back, the one near the window that fogged up in winter and faced the street like a lazy spectator. 2 mugs of coffee already steamed on the table, and a slice of cherry pie sat between them with 2 forks sticking out like flags of surrender. "You're late," Doris said, smirking. "I made a deposit," Pat replied, unbuttoning her coat. "More money?" "More meaning." Doris raised her coffee in salute. To women who put their money where their legacy is. Pat clinked her cup against hers. And to women who bring pie instead of advice. Because I know which one actually works. They ate in the quiet way old friends do. No rush, no need to fill every silence. The cafe buzzed around them with conversation and clatter, a couple arguing over winter tires, a waitress dropping a plate and laughing at herself, the hum of life happening without urgency. Outside, the snow drifted in slow spirals, catching in corners and skating across the sidewalk in soft bursts. The world looked like a blank canvas no one was in a hurry to fill. "You look different," Doris said after a while. "Lighter." "I am." Doris chewed a bite of pie. "Funny what peace looks like. It's not dramatic, just soft." "Soft and earned," Pat said. She looked out the window. A girl in a red coat was helping her younger brother build a small snowman on the curb. They laughed when its head fell off, then started over again, giggling like it was the best thing that had ever happened. Pat smiled. She didn't think about Emily, not in the usual way. Not with the ache, the longing, the internal edits of conversations that would never happen. She thought of the check, of Gerald's name, of welding torches and community college enrollment packets, of young women who would never know her but might feel her presence in the quiet resilience that money could offer them. That was enough. That was the account she had chosen to keep. As Doris flagged the waitress for more napkins, Pat sat back in the booth, her hand resting lightly on the table, the hum of life settling around her like a second skin. She didn't need to speak to be heard anymore. She didn't need to explain why she had walked away. That part of the story had ended. And in its place, something new, something small but unshakable, was a truth that no one could edit or erase. Respect isn't given, it's withdrawn.